I always wondered why my mom told me to go to sleep before midnight. Tonight I learned my lesson. So let's get one thing straight. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment with my single mother and our beloved pet African gray parrot. It was close to 11 p.m. on a weekend, but I wasn't feeling tired at all, so I decided I would stay up a bit later watching some YouTube videos on my phone. The time passed by fairly quickly, and my mother came by to my room to let me know I should go to sleep soon, as it was getting late. I noticed it was almost midnight. I nodded, knowing that I wasn't allowed staying up past midnight anyway, and put my phone away until she settled into bed. Usually I would just shut my eyes and force myself to sleep if I wasn't tired, because in the past, I tried staying up late in secret and my mother was very upset with me. But this night, I decided to rebel and take my chances. So I waited about 20 minutes or so for her to doze off, and then I quietly grabbed my phone once again and turned down the brightness and hid under my blankets with my earphones watching YouTube videos again until I felt more tired to sleep. Video after video, the time passed by faster with every passing minute, and before I knew it, it was already past 3 a.m. and I was starting to feel drowsy now, and also quite thirsty too. This was a problem because I didn't want to wake up my mom by going to the kitchen, but my mouth was so dry that I couldn't take it anymore, and I quietly got out of my bed and entered in the dark, cold kitchen to get a glass of water. As I was in the kitchen, I heard my parrot start to speak through the blanketed covering cage that we used to help it sleep better throughout the night. "Hello, hello, I see you, pretty, hello." Oh no, I woke him up. I didn't want him to wake up my mother because then she would find out that I disobeyed her and didn't go to sleep right away. I quickly walked back to my room and snuggled in my bed, hoping the bird would calm down and be quiet, but I kept hearing it still talking to me. "Where'd you go? Come back, hello, come back." I started getting really stressed out now, so I got up once again to go check on the bird and try to calm it down. But as I lifted up the blanket, I saw that the bird was all curled up with his head buried in his wing, sleeping soundly. And that's when it hit me, and I felt a cold rush sweeping through my entire body as I started staring at my sleeping bird while hearing the same voice coming from behind me, speaking once more. "Hello, I see you." And the time on the clock in front of me read 4 a.m. I lived in a house from 1938. I would wake up and sit up in bed every single night at 2:59 to 3:01 a.m. I thought I saw something move quickly out of the corner of my eye on occasion, but assumed it was just me being sleepy without my glasses. One night the curtain on my closet moved, and I pulled the lamp chain on the room lit up. My husband thought I was crazy and I saw nothing, so I pulled the chain again to turn off the lamp. I tried to sleep again, but a few minutes later, I heard the lamp chain swinging against the lamp base. When I reached out to see if I felt it swinging and to stop it, something cold touched me. It didn't feel like the shape of a hand or a finger, but more like a wet washcloth. We moved soon after that due to relocating, but I stopped waking up every morning at the new house and haven't had any weird feelings since. I watched one of our cats being pulled backwards about 5 feet by her tail. She was walking through the dining area and suddenly was sliding backwards, as if someone was pulling her by her tail. Only there wasn't anybody. She freaked out and tried to run, but couldn't immediately as something held on for a brief second before letting her go. I tend to think that was the handiwork of a 4 to 5-year-old girl ghost who hangs out and she just wanted to play with the kitty. One night, when I was about 12, I was drifting off to sleep, and then I clearly heard a baby laugh for 1 to 2 seconds. Presumed it was just my imagination, and went back to sleep. The next morning, my sister mentioned that she'd been woken by the sound of a baby crying. I didn't really believe in ghosts, but I've never been able to explain that night. I lived in a house for about 5 years that was haunted, but not in a malicious way. in a shitty roommate kind of way. I'd come home to the windows on the second floor being open when it was raining, to food containers being open in the fridge that I hadn't touched yet. The worst was that ghost hated clocks. She hated them. I had antique cuckoo clocks that had worked for 50 years that would just stop. Brand new wall clocks that ate through batteries like it was candy. My watch ended up on the floor one morning, the crystal shattered, even though I knew I slept with it on. The one that pissed me off the most was that I got a brand new Kit Kat clock for Christmas, and the bitch threw it off the wall. I was cooking, and out of the corner of my eye, saw the cat freaking fly. Turned around and it was across the kitchen, broken. It was brand new. Man, she was a bitch. I am typically a skeptic and can usually apply logic to a situation and figure out a plausible explanation. When I bought my house, they had to disclose reports of paranormal activity concerning the house. I thought, yay, whatever, but entertained it in good humor, even addressing said ghost by name. There is nothing concrete that I can tell you. Nothing hovering in the air, no furniture appealing on the ceiling, nothing that shows any type of blip on anyone's typical paranormal radar. However, the number of times I've had to rationalize an event or come up with explanations for why or how something happened borders on obsessive. The typical footsteps upstairs, children laughing, before I had children, knocking on walls or doors, hey, it's an old house, creaks, groans, hot water pipes pinging, it happens all the time. Light bulbs smashed on the floor having removed themselves from the metal base. One plant in particular that would get overturned often, on one occasion ending up halfway across the room. The stereo turning on and off at random times of the day, almost always to classical music, so frequently that I would always keep one classical CD in a random slot in the CD player just to see if that is the one that gets played. Various lost objects showing up in highly noticeable places, like how can you lose your watch in the middle of the completely cleared kitchen table? Yet after a half hour of searching, there it is. But the ones that get me the most are the ones where I am completely stumped. On the same day, every year, is the smell of something burning. It can be detected in only two specific but unrelated parts of the house. You can even define the limits of where you can smell it by walking around. And after about 2 hours it goes away entirely, until the next year. The other one is the presence of hot spots in the house. Not by temperature, but when you stand in a certain place, you feel something. This has been witnessed by people aware as well as unaware of the phenomenon itself, and some of the spots have a direction associated with them. When you stand in one, you feel compelled to face a certain way. I watched a police officer get completely freaked as he turned in mid-sentence to stare at the wall, looking it up and down, and then took 2 solid steps backwards while looking at the floor, and when he turned around, he was visibly shaken. But hey, no spinning chandeliers or dead girls climbing out of the television set, so I'm good. My son, about 4 years old at the time, would jabber away in his room by himself. One day, my wife asked him who he was talking to, and he said he was talking with Alice, and that she used to feed the men who lived here. He went on to say that she died because she couldn't breathe, and our house used to be a boarding house before World War II. My sister and then 4-year-old niece moved into a townhouse apartment complex. The niece is 14 now and still remembers this vividly. Ran into my sister's room not long after screaming about the man in her room yelling at her. My sister jumps out of bed and searches around for anyone or anything out of place. Finds nothing. Doors and windows still locked. Happens a couple more times over the next few nights. Niece doesn't want to sleep there. Won't go into her room, etc. So my sister is chatting with one of the other moms at the complex playground one day, and the other lady mentions how creepy that is considering the guy that overdosed in that apartment a few years back. Apparently his son's room was now my niece's room. So my mom does some digging and found the guy's name, which led to his obituary. Pulled up the picture from the obituary and called my niece into the computer room. She got half a step into the room when she saw the photo on the monitor and ran out screaming about the man. He had absolutely no explanation as to how she recognized this guy's picture. So my husband and I rented a really old house. We had to fix it up a bit before my son came home from the hospital. He was very premature, in the NICU for almost 5 months at a time. We took down the wallpaper and painted, took down the popcorn ceiling, the whole 9 yards. The basement was very unfinished and vandalized by the teenagers that lived there before. Swastikas everywhere. We didn't bother finishing it because we didn't really need the room. I went down there once out of the year we lived there. Creepy feeling like someone was watching you, and pissed. Sometimes that creepy feeling would come upstairs. I would give it a week or so thinking it was in my head, and then I would sit in the car with the baby while my husband burned sage to clear it out. He says the feeling while he did was so heavy, very angry, and he would see figures coming at him through the smoke. There were countless experiences there. The two that stick out in my head are as follows. I was showering and the baby was in a little bouncer seat in the doorway. I opened the curtain, and just as I do, the can of air freshener that was sitting on the back of my toilet goes flying towards my baby. If the door wasn't just slightly shut, it would have nailed him. I went full-on batshit crazy. I started yelling, telling them if they were going to mess with anyone, mess with me. He is just a baby, blah, blah, blah. As I'm doing so, the detachable shower head I had went flying off at me, hit the end of his rope and swings down. Shut me right up. The second one was my husband and I were in bed, my son in his room, right down the very small hallway, fast asleep. We had a baby monitor because he was on oxygen and therefore on a pulse ox monitor, so I wanted to be able to hear his alarm going off. So my husband and I were laying in bed together. We usually will talk for a while, and then say our goodnights and fall asleep. We say our goodnights this particular night, and not even 5 minutes later, we both hear, clear as day, a little girl laughing in the baby monitor. My husband jumped up out of bed ready to kick some ass, but I already knew no one was there. I was stunned, literally. I couldn't move until I finally fell asleep. I do not miss that place. Hearing lots of things, screams in the basement, a child and older man laughing when I'm in the shower, furniture being dragged around on my porch, music playing randomly with glasses clinking, and groups of people chatting. I've had lights turn on when I leave the house briefly, and this happened for years. I've had important documents go missing over the weekend, and then when I walk back into the room to search for them, for the third time, they are neatly arranged in a stack on the center of the table. All my cabinets would open when I got home. I would feel what felt like people sitting on my bed at night and then getting up shortly after. My blinds would start shaking. There's some more and weird potential alien story stuff that I won't get into, but yeah, creepy stuff. I hated that house. When I was around 9 or 10 years old, I remember waking up to see a large shadow stood at the foot of my bed. I was living with my dad at the time, and he has a very large 5 floors terrace house built in the 1800s, and every so often there would be an unexplainable event happen, such as footsteps when there's no one there or even voices. On the night this happened, it was just my dad and I in the house, and my sister was staying with my mother at the time. I woke up and noticed the door to my room was wide open. I normally sleep with it closed. I then became aware of a large, shadow-like figure watching me from the end of the bed. When the figure noticed me, it seemed to melt into the floor, and the door to my room slammed shut. Understandably, I was slightly traumatized by the whole experience. I asked my dad the next day if he was in my room, and he denied any knowledge of the event. Green eyes. Lived in Turnquist, and a plane went down in the area killing 300 people. Lightning struck the fuel or something crazy happened. Well, the house I was living in the area was out of code, and electrical was always fritzy. I would go down and try to fix the power in the basement, and these eyes would show up. These green floating eyes. Green like Mountain Dew, and all of the eye is green and not just the iris. My dog would not go down there with me to fix the power, and when the power came back up, the eyes would be gone, and the eyes never appeared in the same place twice. I lived in a big 1840s colonial house with 3 of my friends for a while. It was set back in 80+ acres of state wildlife property, and it was a gorgeous house. The bedrooms were all upstairs and all lined up down the hall. Our third night in the house, right about 30 minutes after we all had sort of called it a night, my doorknob rattled, like someone was fiddling with it. And then I heard the door next to mine rattle. and the next and the next, and all the way down the hall, one at a time. The next morning, one of my housemates asked me why I was messing with the doors last night, since she had asked the two guys in the house and neither of them knew what she was talking about. One night, I woke up with an intense urge to get out of bed, like my brain screaming at me to get up. I laid still for a while, thinking maybe I had been woken up by a noise, but it was around 3 a.m. and dead quiet. I went into the hallway, and as soon as I walked out into the hall, my roommates opened their doors and came out too. We were all woken up, but heard no one or anything, and they had the same urgent get-up feeling I did. We just shrugged and went back to sleep. Weird things would happen there. Strange objects would show up in the basement or crawl space, like old suitcases or a kid's rocking chair. I think once even a vase, just random stuff like that. You would occasionally hear footsteps running down the bedroom hall and down the stairs if you were in the living room below. I could go on. The house was just really strange, and it never felt threatened, just weird. From ages 5 to 17, I lived in a house with activity. It was all pretty basic run-of-the-mill stuff. Footsteps, voices, lights turning on and off, doors opening and shutting, batteries draining, etc. If we started renovating, which we almost always were, they'd get more active and start throwing stuff, so I got used to it. They didn't hurt us, so we just let it go. Even my father started believing after a while. But the worst thing they ever did was while we were moving in. I was 5 at the time, and my friend and I were playing in the only room that was finished in the basement, while my parents were busy moving the stuff in. My friend's parents were helping too. Suddenly, the door to the room slammed shut. No wind, no draft, no explanation whatsoever. And then the lock engaged with a click, and someone started laughing. We were stuck in the room for 2 hours. Living in Chicago last year in a top-floor apartment of a 3-flat style building, the kitchen at the back of the apartment had a door leading to a staircase down to the basement, connecting all the apartments and to outside. My housemate was cooking, and she left the back door open as we had no AC or windows big enough for ventilation. As I walked into the kitchen, she ran to the back door and slammed it shut as I heard a woman's voice saying, "Hello," over and over coming from the stairs. We stood behind our door listening, and we could hear someone was coming up the stairs really slowly, the steps creaking all the way up to our back door, and then they reached the top, turned around and went back down again. After about 5 or so minutes of being quite freaked out, another housemate and I slowly went down to the basement with some makeshift weapons and checked it out. Looked around and inside everything possible, and calmly saying hello back. Nothing there. A lady did live in the basement apartment, but would never have any reason to come upstairs to the top, and was nowhere to be seen either. The landlord then let us know his mother haunts the whole building. I lived in an older home for about 5 or so years. My stepdad, who knew the man who had lived there before us, told me he hung himself in the attic. I honestly didn't think much of it, that is until I heard the footsteps. Like clockwork, every night at 3 a.m., I would hear footsteps walking along the length of the attic, which would go over my room. The steps were heavy, and you could clearly tell the pace was at a normal walking speed. It sounded like a man contemplating something, thinking about his next move. If it was really the former owner, were those his final moments being played out every night before his fateful decision? Who can say? There were other stories, but those footsteps, which went on for years, still freak me out to this day. Many different things have happened, but this one sticks out the most. It was my mom who had it happen, not myself directly. Backstory. The house we lived in was photographed in the 1860s in a book in the local library. It was shown to be one of the first houses to have a radio and some sort of headphone device on top of someone's head. The story. I go on my merry way to school one day, and my mom is home alone cleaning up after breakfast, not too soon after I leave, so she is doing her thing when she begins to hear music upstairs. She thinks to herself that I had left the radio on, and she is pissed because we are poor and try to save every penny we can on our electric bill. She gets to the top of the stairs, which has an open railing. She looks to the right and there's a pair of legs standing there, tapping feet to the music. She didn't even stay to look up for her body. She noped the fuck out as the music stopped and the legs began to turn to her. My mom made me sleep with her for like a week. I was 15 at the time, and I've had numerous experiences in that house though. It made a skeptical, big, burly construction worker with sun-kissed skin turn pale as a ghost. Shit is no joke, my friends. My ex-wife was staying at her grandparents' house, which used to be a church. All the cousins have stories from this place, but my wife's was an odd one. They are all listening to the radio one night when the window drapes start moving a lot and nothing but static started coming from the radio. The girls freaked out and started screaming, and as soon as they started screaming, it stopped and a voice came out of the radio saying, "Sorry to have bothered you. I'll leave you alone now." Drapes went back into place and the music comes back on. Used to have regular repeating nightmares where, you know, someone's in the house and you walk down the hall and you find your family murdered in the kitchen, the old kitchen before remodeling of course, and run for the door with the only faint chance of escape before getting caught. Well, years before we moved out, I learned that my brother had been having the exact same nightmare I did. Neither of us had ever talked about it before until now, and we all think it's because of our experiences in the house we had lived at. Night after night, we would see this same woman appear in our rooms. She would be in full black and would just stand there in the corner looking at us, grimacing. It was years me and my brother dealt with that, and neither of us said anything about it to each other until very recently. Rebuilt 100-year-old mansion. One night, both my wife and I heard a clear voice say, "Listen." Empty house, except for us. Very spooky. Later on, found out my uncle knew the family that lived there decades ago, and that the father had committed suicide by jumping off the third-story balcony. It was not questionable. We both heard it and quizzed each other as to what exactly we each heard. Too many to tell, but I'll tell the one that messed with me the most. I work night shift, so I sleep during the day. Boyfriend and mother-in-law went out for the day. I know for a fact no one was home. I woke up, lay there for a second, groaned and stretched, and a man's voice groaned back right beside my head. I noped out there pretty fast and checked the house, home alone. Fun fact, the previous owner was an elderly man who died in the very front room. He likes to shut and lock our doors when we're not paying attention. My mom worked 3 to 11 and usually got groceries and whatnot on a Friday or Saturday night when she knew I'd be home to help bring them in. I was playing video games and she called the house phone to let me know she was almost there. Pretty normal. I went and waited for her to pull in the driveway and was noticing a woman that was nobody I knew standing behind me in the reflection from the light in the kitchen. She stared at me for probably 5 seconds before walking into the adjacent hallway leading to my bedroom. I asked my mom about it and she said it was probably my grandmother and not to worry about it. Yeah, okay. As a kid, I would make stupid videos with my friends, and sometimes I like to rewatch them and cringe at our shenanigans. Quite recently, I rewatched a video a friend and I made in August of 2009. The video consists of our usual fucking about. Halfway through the video, there is a short 2-second clip wherein my friend is flailing a toy sword around and screaming in my room. My friend is sitting with his back to the open door, and a dark figure is seen walking down the hallway past the open door. The figure is only visible for 1 second, but there is no doubt something did pass by. The thing is, I remember vividly being home alone that day. My father always told me a guy burned to death in that hallway, and my mother swore she sometimes heard a coughing at night. I remember the hallway always smelling faintly of smoke, even though no one in the family smoked. I don't know, it just spooks me out. Several people, myself included, have seen or felt a presence, which we have affectionately called the man in white. In order, here are the stories we encountered. My brother was cooking with his girlfriend in the kitchen, and from the periphery he saw a white figure pass in front of the kitchen door, as walking through the hallway. I was in my room and he asked me if I had passed through there. I hadn't. A maid was cleaning the bathroom and she felt a really intense feeling that she was being stared at and something was looking at her from the bathroom's door. She told my mom that it really affected her. A different maid was walking through the hallway that connects the bedroom, on her way to clean the bathroom that's on the way to my room. When she got to the bathroom, the door was open and saw a figure standing in front of the toilet. She assumed it was me peeing with the door open and quickly turned away and continued on to the bedrooms to tidy them up. I was in my room, so when she got to it and saw me, she turned around to the bathroom to check if there was somebody. She screamed and sat at my bed pale with goosebumps when she notices it wasn't there anymore. While I was in the same bathroom, brushing my teeth, I saw a shadow pass through the hallway. Granted, I don't give my story much importance because it might have been nothing and just my brain forming patterns. My mother's sneakers fell to the floor from on top of the washing machine when it wasn't even turned on. My mother even brought an uncle of hers who was a priest to cleanse the house, and that was before the second maid and I saw him. I know these stories are pretty mild, but the man in white is pretty chill. He's become a reoccurrent joke at our house. The dogs are looking fixedly at the hall, the man in white. I lose my socks, the man in white. Someone feels a presence somehow, chill, man in white. My house was abandoned for 2 years before we bought it. When we went for the viewing, there was a bedroom closet that was padlocked shut. Think barn door latch with a lock through it. Realtor said they had no key and we couldn't open it unless we bought it. Well, we ended up buying it and priority number 1 was opening that door. After a few minutes with a pry door, we get it in to reveal a child's play area. Bright colored walls, glow-in-the-dark sticks on stars and planets to cover the ceiling, checkered tile for the floor, no lights, no air vents, no windows. My little brother chimes in, "Well, this must be where they kept the kids before they died." Fast forward through 3 months of renovations to when we move in and are living there. The loft area has a daylight sensing, motion sensor light as there is no easy way to install a switch. The light comes on by itself all hours of the day. No matter what way we position the sensor, it just randomly trips and we jokingly shout out, "Will you darn kids quit running in the house?" And that's usually the last time it comes on during the day. A year into living there, we have turned the creepy closet bedroom into our computer room. We leave for work at the same time each day, but arrive home about 2 hours apart. I get a call from a very confused wife one day asking why I had come back home after we had left together. I did not go back home. Upon returning from work, she was greeted by our computer room chair and our kitchen. The chair had to travel through the 2 doorways, down a hallway and a flight of stairs to reach the kitchen. Seemingly all by itself, and we thought it odd but blamed the dead kids. Those heathen kids. About 6 months after that, we had our last big doozy of an event for a while. We go to bed one night and to a house in perfect order. Upon waking, we find that all of our kitchen knives have been removed from the butcher block. In their place, all of our butter knives, the sharp, dangerous knives, have been placed behind the kitchen sink instead. We neither one had moved them, but we both were pretty freaked out and spent the whole day away from the house trying to sort it out. We decided we were being unreasonable and went home to forget the whole ordeal. Ghosts aren't real and there weren't actually any kids who died there. Talking to the neighbor one day, and he confirms that no kids died in the house, but a grown man had. The room with the creepy closet was the room where the previous owner's brother committed suicide. When his wife left and they failed to work it out, he couldn't handle life anymore, cut his wrist and bled out. The previous owner kept living there afterwards, but finding out he was foreclosed on, attempted suicide in the same room. His children found him and he ended up living. Later that year, our family grows. The rooms all get shuffled to make room for a baby. The creepy closet room, it gets emptied out and the weird things all stopped happening. To this day, that room is only used for storage. My 4-year-old son plays in there occasionally, but even in the daytime with all the light the window lets into the bedroom, he turns every light on. When asked why, he just said, "It makes it less weird to play in there." The house I grew up in had a slightly strange design in that all the bedrooms were clumped together, and at one of the house and the kitchen and living room were all at the other end. The two areas were connected by a long, narrow hallway that had a bathroom in the middle and approximately 900 closets on either side. My bedroom door was at the end of the hall, with two other bedrooms facing each other across the hall on either side. Basically, this meant that if you were sitting in our living room, you could look straight down the hallway to my bedroom door. Now, lots of strange and frightening things happened in that house, but the one that we could never rationalize away or lie to ourselves about was the darkness at the end of the hall. Like I said above, the hallway was very long and narrow, and it was also paneled in dark wood, so it was pretty dark down there. But with the living room lights on, there was always enough light to see down the hall and make out my bedroom door. But sometimes we'd be sitting in the living room and get the feeling that we were being watched, or that something was about to happen. When that would come over us, the end of the hallway would be completely blocked out. It was like someone dropped a curtain over the end of the hall, and you could see part of the way down, and then there was just blackness. When this happened, our 3 little dogs, God bless them, would go to the mouth of the hallway and sit in a line across it, staring down into the darkness. Sometimes they'd bark a little, or even growl, but mostly they just sat and stared. Once in a while, one of them would get brave enough to walk down the hall, but they never got more than halfway to the darkness before they'd stop and back up. They would walk backwards up the hall, never turning their back on whatever they were looking at. After a little while, the oppressive feeling would lift and the darkness would disappear, and the dogs would wander off. This didn't happen often, but compared to all the normal spookiness in that house, things disappearing, stuff flying off the shelves, strange voices or breezes, etc., that was just one of the things we can never convince ourselves was just in our heads. When I was a kid, about 8 or 9 years old, I had a TV stand in front of my window. The lights from the street always were on, so in the dark I could easily make out the outline of where my TV was. I started seeing a shadow figure of a girl standing right next to my TV. I could make out her figure so clear, hair and everything. I spent nights just looking at her. I couldn't even sleep. One night I got sick of it and threw a pillow at her. As soon as I did, I put my head under the other pillow. I have it a couple of minutes and looked up and she was right next to me at the edge of my bed. I screamed so loud and my parents came in and turned on the lights. A few days later, my little sister told me that she has been seeing a little girl in her room. I never told my little sister about my experience prior to that. Weird. I was around 16 when this happened. I happened to lay in the bed and started reading something actually. The room at first would feel normal, and then it started to feel really icy. And not that the room got cold, but just the feeling it gave me, if that makes sense. It felt really uncomfortable. Next, it would feel as if something or somebody just stared at you. There wasn't nobody there, nor did I see a thing. But just the feeling that something looked at you, hate-filled, was enough for me. And often I got the feeling, leave the room. So I did, and then just played a video game of some sort. The thing had left the room after about an hour or so, and this happened about 3 times. In the same room and the same home, 3 other things happened that were weird. The first was a shadow person sneaking along the walls in my bedroom during the day. Second, we had a dog, a small one named DJ. Think something along the size of a fox terrier and you've got it. One day I came home to collect something from my room. It was during the day and DJ followed me in. I heard a deep growling from under the bed. At first I thought it must have been the dog, but I already knew that DJ wasn't capable of making this deep of a noise. It sounded either like a really big dog or a man doing his best and kind of scary growling impression. This happened only once, but the experience just stuck with me. Another weird thing with the dog was the time he was afraid to come to the living room. Next to my bedroom there was a small room. We used it as a computer room, and DJ was in there at the time, and I heard him whimpering and pacing, even growling lowly at a thing that was in the hallway. I called him, but he didn't budge. I had to come and pick him up and then remove him from the room. They all happened at the same flat. I lived there a few years with my mom after the divorce, and things happened, and I left her home to live with my dad. She moved a few months later, but I think she was the one that carried this thing with her. At my dad's, a few small things happened, but nothing like the experiences with my mother. Moved from the US to the UK, and our parents bought an old beat-up house. It still had lead pipes for the water, a nightmare on all its own. Anyway, work proceeded on the house whilst we lived there. We started seeing bright lights in the corners of the rooms at night, footsteps on floorboards, the house had carpet. I was about 6 at the time and started getting woken up in the night by a little girl who would dance on my chest of drawers for me. I was freaking terrified. My mom just fobbled it off as me dreaming. Workmen complained of strange things happening, like tools being moved and odd feelings like being watched. After about a year of this, my eldest sister friend stayed over the night. She woke the whole house up screaming, saying a little girl had been in her room. She had apparently pulled her from the bed. The friend left the house and refused to ever come back. Mom decided she might need to do something about it and got some advice. He suggested my mom and the whole family should treat the presence as a part of the family. So when we got home, we shout, "Hi, we're home, did you have a good day?" Over time, the house settled and we didn't get any more trouble. We also found out a little girl did die in the house of asthma. My parents still live there and it is a beautifully homely place now. A little backstory. Growing up, my brother and I lived with our single mother. The house was a little 500 square foot home, but we were so young it wasn't a huge deal. My mom remarried and the newlyweds decided to tear down the old house and build a ranch on the land. Strange, but explainable. Things started happening after we moved back in. One of the strangest things that happened was when my brother and I were in the house alone. We were hanging out at an island in the kitchen, talking about what teenage boys talk about, when I hear the faintest whisper of someone saying my brother's name. Probably just hearing things. About 30 seconds later, though, a little louder, my brother's name again. He was talking when I heard the second whisper, and he seemed to hear it too, because he stopped when he was saying briefly. Finally, about 15 seconds after the second interruption, clearly and angrily a raspy voice says his name. We looked at each other and he asked, "Did someone just say my name?" I told him I'd heard it more than once. He said, 3 times, right? We grabbed our coats and went to get Burger King. So I used to live in a big house. And by big, I mean 6 bedrooms, 4 bath, basement, etc. All by myself. I was there as a hiring perk and to look after the place for my boss who lived out of state but owned the home. One of those win-win situations. The first couple months were fine, but when winter came, I started hearing things coming from the second floor. I lived pretty much exclusively on the first. It started with little bumps and bangs coming from above where I had my computer set up, and progressed to distinct footsteps coming and going across the second floor. I had been up to the second floor to check up on it from time to time, and I knew that there were unfinished areas up there. One place always stuck out. An unfinished room that was sort of walk-in closet for one of the upstairs bedrooms. It was attached to the garage attic, which is completely unlit. It was open when I went to investigate the noises. I shut the door and locked it. 2 nights later, more noises. Footsteps leading from the unfinished room to the bathroom, and then nothing. The worst part is the door. The door that led to the unfinished room would not stay closed or locked. I tried everything. Eventually, I pushed the bed up against the door to keep it from opening, and that seemed to work. A few months went by without the door coming open, but I would find it unlocked all the time. As time passed, I would hear noises all over the house, mostly footsteps, but the occasional thump with no explanation. I cannot explain how horrifying it is to hear little taps up and down the hall from the other side of a bathroom door during your morning shower. I eventually moved out, but another employee moved in to take my place, and his stay there only lasted about a month. The story he told me is that he was shaving one morning before work and he heard a slam. Like someone dropped a heavy stack of books right outside his bedroom door, and then heavy footsteps like someone running down the hall. He won't stay there anymore, and no one in the company will live in the house. When I was a little kid, I had no control over my life whatsoever. I was bullied, I was beaten by my parents, etc. When I began the first grade after daycare, I met a guy. His name was Tim, and we quickly became good friends. We hung out every day, and I did like him. But over time, he became more rude and started treating me badly. When we started arguing, we usually started getting into physical fights. In his world, he was the best. He was superior to everyone and nobody could beat him. But after all the times we argued, he always apologized. Me and him did a lot of illegal things together. Vandalized, stole, etc. But one of the most illegal things we did was having sex. The sexual thing started at around the age of 7. We started getting into sexual acts, oral and anal. I'm a guy, by the way, and I am not gay. These things continued to the age of 11 to 13. Around that age where we started drifting apart, I became bored with him and he treated me bad. And it was also around these times I started killing animals. That began when my friends and I, including Tim, saw 2 baby birds that could not fly. And I think this is where my insanity started to grow. I told my friends that those birds will die from hunger and it would be better if we ended them so that they would feel no hunger or pain. They all hesitated, but I didn't care. I grabbed a stick and I beat their first bird to death with it. It made very painful sounds. Another of my friends grabbed a big rock and dropped it on its face to make sure it was dead. While I was beating the bird to death, I was laughing, and my friends did too. I proceeded to beat the second bird to death. I was laughing then as well. The sexual acts between me and Tim had stopped. Time passed and I started 7th grade. When I started 7th grade, I was separated from my friends. I was actually kind of quite the loner back then. I had only one friend in the whole 7th grade. For the purpose of this story, let's call him James. James was a pretty bullied guy. He smelled bad, never really showered, was poor. He was 17. He was really skinny and kind of looked like a monster. We always sat on a bench on the breaks and watched videos together. I quickly became bullied too, but I was never insulted or physically abused, but I was still treated badly. Around this time I was very insecure. Tim, however, was popular. He made friends quickly and he was raised in a loving home. He wasn't treated like me. I was a very misunderstood child. Time passed and suddenly I was in the 8th grade. That was when strange things began happening to my head. I started stealing a lot and I got into physical fights. I manipulated and killed a lot of animals. The most common animal I killed was hedgehogs, and I killed them with a sledgehammer. I did not kill them so I could feel in control. I did it because it was exciting. Watching blood run out of their mouths, to watch them run away as I beat them with the sledgehammer. Back then I liked animals, and I still do, it's hard to admit. I tried to kill cats, but they're too fast. All these animals frequently came to my house for food, and it was also when I started killing animals. I began to see things. I heard whistling, footsteps, running, and seeing things that were not there, and it was pretty much impossible that the chances of what I saw would happen. Around this time, my parents did not abuse me, though they did threaten me a lot. If you want me to get into a blind rage, you threaten me. In 8th grade, I had beat a kid so badly that his fingers broke, and he was bleeding from his head, and he had bruises all over his body. My most common emotion then was anger and frustration. I could get angry over anything, even whilst it was a little thing. Summer vacation for me had started. Sick and twisted thoughts began, and I had twisted ideas. I manipulated my brother into doing sexual activities with me. I would tell him to do sexual favors in return of chocolate milk and candy. My brother was 10 years old at the time. I had 3 siblings, and I had been in sexual relations with all of them, but the 2 others I did not have to manipulate. My obsession with sex started to grow more and more. I had a very dark and sick sexual fantasies in my mind, and in those fantasies, children and dead bodies were included. It got so bad I started masturbating in public and in front of children, and it became a daily thing. I began Googling violent porn and started watching very, very violent rape videos and of that sorts. And before you judge me, remember, I had never felt real love. I have never been protected against anyone or anything, and nobody has ever stood up for me. So let's continue. One day I found a website, a pretty famous one. I shall not give the name of this website for safety reasons, since it contains all kinds of violent things. It was a website that contained very, very violent things. It had all kinds of categories: beheading, murder, torture. It was very, very graphic, and I don't recommend anyone with a light stomach to watch it. But watching these videos became daily for me. The more I watched, the less surprised the videos I got. At some point I got impressed by it. Nowadays you could slice someone's throat in front of me and you would get no reaction. I did then and do now to enjoy people suffering and watching them suffer. It's very entertaining in my eyes. One day my parents found out I had sex with my brother. Of course I denied it all, but they did not believe me. When the summer vacation was over, I started school once again, with these thoughts still in my head. My anger grew, and it got so bad that if someone said hi mockingly to me, I would instantly want to slice their throats open and destroy their bodies in the most painful way without remorse or guilt. And at this time, it got really bad. I started to plan a way to kill Tim and his other friend. I invited him over to my house to talk about an assignment we were working on together. The plan was to slice his throat, but that would make things messy. So I sprayed poison on the left side of a knife. I offered him an apple and he said yes. I cut the apple in half and gave him the left side of the apple. But before he was going to take a bite from the apple, he said he had to go. My plan had failed. Time passed. Life went on as usual. I had bragged to one guy that I had killed hedgehogs, and yes, I bragged about something like that. That guy, let's call him Jim, told my little brother about what I did, and my brother told my parents. My parents found the dead hedgehogs. When I was going to bed that day, little did I know that I was going to hear the worst words that would ever come out of my mom's mouth. When I was laying in bed, I could hear my mom and my dad talking to each other. My mom said with her heart in her throat, crying, "He's fucking insane, can't you see that?" My father responded with a simple, My mom proceeded to walk up the stairs crying and telling me, "You are not going near my dogs, you hear me?" I had the worst feeling I have ever felt in my entire life. When she had left, I started to plan how to kill that fucking Jim that told my parents I was going to fucking cut off his head with a blunt knife so he would suffer. I talked to myself and probably would have seemed insane to people if they had seen me, but I did not kill him. Instead, my parents sent me to a therapist. The therapist asked me questions on all those things that therapists do. And one day when I was in therapy, the therapist left to go get some papers. But she had left the notes about me on the table, and I looked through the notes. I don't remember a lot to this day, but I still remember some things like possible psychopath, dark thoughts, very impulsive. All of this happened a long time ago. Some time ago was going to be a brain scan, and surprise, surprise, I lacked activity in many areas of my brain, similar to a psychopath. I was diagnosed as a sociopath a long time ago, but even to this day I still have those dark thoughts and fantasies. I still have those urges to kill animals and hurt others. I've still not killed a person, but I really want to. I've tried to, and I will probably try again. I don't know what happened to James. Last time I saw him, he was moving to Japan to become a teacher. I don't either know what happened to Jim or Tim. I don't have a lot of contact with my family anymore, and I live alone now. In my opinion, I would consider Tim and Jim very lucky. Very, very lucky with what I had in store for them. grandma says we can't look out the windows. Everyone in my family lives in the same house. I don't mean the same physical house, like some big multi-generational living setup. No, almost every member of my family, direct and extended, lives in houses that are identical to each other. Large, Victorian, and kind of creepy if you're not used to it. When someone dies, the family gets another family member to live in that house instead. There are a few outliers, but honestly, they tend to be younger members of the family who will one day wind up living in one of the houses. I listened to a radio show once where people talked about the funniest things they misunderstood as kids. One person thought that the Nielsen families were all families with the name Nielsen, and they got to grade TV shows because they represented some sort of perfect cross-section of America. Well, I thought everyone's families all lived in houses that looked exactly alike. This wasn't totally unfounded. I grew up in a small town, and the only friend of mine who had family lived there near each other and in little subdivisions where all the houses were identical. I mean, it made sense. Setting aside my childhood misconceptions, of course, the houses each had specific rules. Again, this was something I accepted as a child, though I now recognize how strange it was. When we visited my Aunt Megan's house, we had to wear 2 watches each. She insisted on it and would check on us each before coming to the door to ensure that they were both working and synchronized. We were never allowed to go inside of my Uncle Frank's house. We would meet him outside, play in the yard, and go to the bathroom in a porta potty he rented before our visits. From time to time, I would swear that I saw people wearing dark robes standing in the windows, watching us play in the yard. Our house was fairly normal, as these things went. However, there were 2 doors on the upper level that had many locks on the doors. I never once saw them opened. My cousins lived in the strictest of houses, and no one was ever allowed to walk around alone. You always had to be with a buddy, and you could never be out of sight of another person. Once my sister wandered off alone and said she saw me playing upstairs, and almost frowned until I realized that she was gone, and called to her from downstairs and told her to come back. My grandparents, though, lived in a house where the windows were always closed. Every window throughout the house had a blackout shade and a heavy curtain around it, and we were forbidden to touch them. My sister and cousins would all try to peek out from time to time, and were harshly scolded for it, but it never bothered me. The weird rules were just something I'd lived with. This is probably why when my grandmother asked me to watch the house when she went away, my grandfather had passed a few years before, and one day she got a letter that a cousin somewhere overseas was ill, and she announced that she would be going there and would be gone for the summer. She chose me to check on the house once a day, feeding the cats and ensuring nothing had gone wrong. She told me I had always listened to the rules and was the only logical choice. I was the honey child, to be exact. I didn't mind. It was school break. My girlfriend was on vacation, and the money my grandmother was paying me, just for the trouble, was enough that I didn't have to get a job and could take a few extra classes online instead. The first few days were fine. I went in, checked all the bathrooms for water leaks, fed the cats, and left. A few days later, while walking upstairs, I passed a window and could hear the faint sounds of voices through it. My grandmother lives on a remote and large piece of land, so hearing something meant there were trespassing without a doubt. Without thinking, I moved the curtains and pulled up the blinds. The world outside was not ours. Instead of my grandmother's yard, I was looking at a futuristic-looking city where people moved on about contraptions I had only seen in fake movies. I was entranced, watching people dart back and forth on contraptions straight out of a science fiction movie. That, for a minute, I forgot that I was looking at was literally impossible. I quickly moved to another window and opened the shades. Here I saw a dark beast floating just beyond the window. It looked like some sort of mutant bat with giant leathery wings and one unblinking yellow eye. Another window showed a burning hellscape as far as the eye could see. In the distance, I watched the outlines of giant beasts move through pools of fire. My head just went spinning. I went running to the front door and outside, ready for whatever insane world awaited me. Instead, I saw my car in my grandmother's yard, and the trees that ring the property in the distance. Everything was fine and as is. Whatever I saw beyond the windows did not affect the world I lived in. Over the next few days, I started to catalog all the worlds I saw. There were 32 windows, including one that appeared to just show our world. Some were frightening, like the fire world, or the world full of people as far as the eye could see with completely wide eyes, just standing and staring at the window. Others appeared desolate, like the ice world, or one that was heavily forested, but where I never saw a single living creature, not even a bird. Others appeared to be fairly normal, like ours, just slightly different. One seemed to contain just a single entity, the bat creature, though the bat often appeared as other things, from a child to a kitten, to a fantastical looking bird with 4 sets of wings and 3 heads. Every time I left the house, I carefully covered each window before locking up, careful to ensure nothing was out of place. This lasted until Gary and his girlfriend had broken up. I was about to leave my grandmother's when he called, drunk and sobbing about her leaving him. What terrified me was that he was driving around, but after talking to him for a minute, I realized he was right down the road, so I told him to meet me there to sleep it off. I couldn't have him out potentially killing someone in his current condition. Gary was just an absolute mess, so I got him to one of the bedrooms and went downstairs to find water and some Advil to take for what was sure to be a rough night. All the way down the hall, I could hear him crying about Amy. I was filling up the glass of water when I heard a scream and the lights in the house all went out. I stumbled upstairs with a flashlight on my phone to see Gary on the floor in front of an open window. "What happened?" I shouted. It was Amy. She was outside trying to climb in the window. She was going to fall, he sobbed. I slammed the window shut, but the bat creature that normally lurked just beyond it was now gone. "Where did it go?" I demanded. Gary just shook his head. "What was that thing? That wasn't Amy." He started crying again. I left him there and ran downstairs to find the front door now open, and the beast had gone into the night. My grandmother is gone for another few weeks, and I don't have any way to reach her. But that thing is out there somewhere. I hear noises in the night now, giant wings flapping outside. 2 children now have disappeared from the yards without anyone seeing a thing. That window was closed for a reason. Before I tell this story, let me give you some information about myself. I was a 15-year-old nerd, and instead of gawking at girls and playing sports with the guys, I would stay awake for lunar eclipses and other celestial events happening in the night sky. I loved sci-fi movies, and space has always intrigued me. My favorite movie was Alien. In space, no one can hear you scream. Just gives me chills when saying it. So, it was October 26th of 2007. I was looking through my telescope investigating the beautiful night sky. And that's when I noticed an unusually bright object. Whoa, I thought. At first, I thought it was a bright star, but later, I would find out that it was indeed not. It was a comet, actually, and this comet would later be realized as Holmes, named after Edwin Holmes, who discovered it in 1892. No one knows why the Holmes became so bright so suddenly. I watched the celestial object with delight, and then something peeled away from the comet. I moved from my telescope away the comet and followed the new object. It was getting brighter and brighter till I realized it was falling down to Earth. But not only was it falling to Earth, it was coming straight at me. I pulled myself away from the telescope just in time to see the thing crash into my backyard. It shook the whole house as it thundered into the ground, and my parents were out on a date, and, being a 15-year-old only child, I was old enough to not need a babysitter, so I was home alone entirely, and the closest neighbor was a mile away due to us living out in the country in Michigan. I slipped into my slippers and ran down the stairs, whipping open the screen door to the backyard. Smoke covered the scene as I used my arm to shield my eyes from the watering, with no luck. I coughed a few times as the smoke began to clear. When it did, my eyes grew double the size as I saw what lay in my backyard. It wasn't a meteorite, but a cube. It was a black cube, the size of a Rubik's Cube to be exact, and it had weird symbols carved into it that glowed in neon green. I went to go pick it up, but could sense the heat exuding from the object. I went back inside to retrieve oven mitts and came back outside. I picked up the black glowing space block and took it upstairs to the bathroom across the hall from my room. I placed it in the bathtub and cooled it off. Steam hissed as water sprayed onto the cube. As soon as it was cool enough to touch, I grabbed the cube with my bare hands. And as soon as I did, I was literally shocked by it and dropped it onto the ground. That hurt, I thought. I hesitantly picked it up again, and this time, I was free to hold it. I rolled the cube around in my hands, and then something happened. My hand glowed green for a second, so I dropped the cube again to look at my hand. Neon green lines started to stream up and down my arms, creating odd symbols that formed on my skin. I screamed as my whole body became filled with these glowing green symbols. Then I passed out. I awoke in a sweat. Lying on the cool tile floor of the bathroom didn't help me cool down. I quickly looked myself over to see if any of the symbols were still on my arms, but they were gone. I looked down at my watch and noticed it had only been about 30 minutes since I passed out. The cube was split in half, as if it had been opened like a box. I slowly got up and stumbled out of the bathroom and made my way to the bedroom. Before opening my door, I heard a sound that I will never forget, like a rat struggling for its life in the grips of a python. I slowly opened the door, peering in to investigate what I could see inside. And as the door opened, I didn't see a thing, but the screeching noise continued. I entered the room with caution, stepping softly to not give away my position. I finally located where the sound was coming from. The screeching was coming from behind my bed. I walked to my bed and past it, slowly getting closer to the screeching. Then, peering around the corner of my bed, I saw it. A pinkish, pale mass was on the ground, rippling as it continued its hellish scream. Something began to form on the side of the thing's body. A twig of an arm punched out the side of the blob, making a sound like a branch breaking in half as it bent its newly made arm to the floor. Then a leg branched out, followed by another leg, and then a second arm. A head began to form, and at this point, I was just getting past the shock of it all and was about to make a run for it. When the head snapped towards me, it had no eyes, but its needle-toothed smile spoke volumes. "What the hell?" I yelled out. "What the hell?" The thing mimicked back in my very own voice. It started to rise and I backed up a few steps. "Just leave me alone," I screamed. "Leave me alone," it mimicked back in perfection. Drool started to ooze out of the creature's mouth. It was hungry. That's when I booked it. I turned to the door and began running as fast as I could. I can hear the thing just behind me yelling in my voice, "Leave me alone." I whipped open the door and turned to shut it. The thing was hopping off the bed and making its way towards me. It was now just as tall as me. I was 5 feet 8 inches tall. I shut the door, but it snapped open instantly. I stumbled backwards as the thing let out a prehistoric screech. It sounded like a pterodactyl from one of those dinosaur documentaries. I kicked my legs out, propelling me backwards as the thing crouched on all fours, preparing to pounce on me. I rolled over and got back up, making my way towards the stale railing as the thing pounced on my back. We rolled down the stairs till reaching the bottom. The thing was stunned and trying to get back up, which I saw as my chance to make a mad dash to the kitchen. I got up and sprinted as fast as I could. The thing's screech could be heard right behind me. I entered the kitchen and went to the sink, where I grabbed the first dirty thing I saw, for I didn't have any time to choose my weapon as the thing busted into the room, yelling, "Leave me alone." I turned to the thing with a dry taco meat stained pan in my hand, and as the thing let out another prehistoric screech, it lunged at me. And as soon as it did, I swung. The pan collided with the thing's face, and it fell to the ground in front of me. I looked at it in shock as it began to get back up again. I shook off the initial shock and brought the pan over my head and slammed it over the thing's head a multitude of times before the thing finally lay there still. I stood over the thing for a good minute before I snapped back into reality and ran to the living room for a cordless phone. I had dialed the police, who said they'd be on their way. I went back to the kitchen to see if the thing was still unconscious, but it had disappeared. The police showed up and investigated the house and the broken down door in the kitchen that led to the backyard. They never found footprints of the monster I described, but they did find unusual footprints that led to the woods. Ever since then, people have told Honey stories of a beast that is 7 feet tall, whose roar could be heard from miles away. Deer carcasses are found around the area torn in half and sucked dry of their blood. And people can often hear a young boy's voice, what I assume was my voice, crying out for help, luring people to their deaths. Whatever I accidentally created has grown up now. It's larger, smarter, and a whole lot hungrier. It haunts me to this very day. You see, we're connected now, somehow. It wants to kill me, and I don't know why. I moved multiple times, but every time I get comfortable, it seems to find me. You see, whatever landed in my backyard that night was sent here by something. And that thing is here now. Whatever it is, an apex predator, I don't think I'd win round 2 if it ever came to that. As I type this in my barricaded home, I hear something clawing at the door, and a voice all too familiar, mockingly saying, "Leave me alone," followed by an horrendous screech.
Come, come, I call you now. Through this portal, I don't know how. Come, come, I invite you in, Mr. Never-Ever-Man, and your see-through skin. I held my breath in the darkened room, frighteningly anticipating for what comes next. But there was nothing. No chilling wind or children screaming. No earthquake or second vortex. Nothing of what's supposed to happen happened. You can come back in now, you guys. The light from the hallway flooded both my bedroom and corners as my friends burst back through the door. Some giggling, others intrigued. So what happened? Yeah, did you see him? What happened? Calm down, calm down. God, nothing happened. Guys, okay, nothing. Nothing whatsoever. Well, just tell us what happened then. What did you do? I did exactly what you told me to do. I made sure all the doors were shut, including the cupboards and the drawers. I turned off all the lights, closed all the curtains, and read out loud this stupid poem. Incantation! The whole group yelled at me. Okay, incantation, whatever. I said the incantation out loud in front of my mirror, waited, and nothing. My 13th birthday sleepover seems like it happened just yesterday. Not nearly 20 years ago. But hearing my own daughter giggle and chat with her small group of friends in her bedroom seemed to trigger my flashback. I could hear the click, click, clicking of a lighter attempting to be used by small hands as I walked past her door. Girls, what are you doing in there? I received a slightly muffled but unison, nothing, from all of them, indicating, of course, that they were indeed up to something. I'm coming in, okay? I shout and knock twice before entering, giving her the illusion of privacy, but also giving them zero time to hide whatever nothing is. All 5 girls were sat on the floor with their legs crossed, their knees each touching the next person, forming a perfect, unbroken circle. In the middle of the circle were 5 of my tea light candles, all lit in one place in front of each other. My eyes widened in horror as I suddenly imagined my entire house on fire, and our charred bodies are crumbling and falling apart. What the hell are you girls doing in here? I tried to sound as non-threatening as possible, but I think they sensed my terror-induced anger, and they all flinched on the spot. Come on, Mom. Be cool, please. We're just messing around. Yeah, exactly. Messing around. Messing around doing what? Just, like, spells and stuff? She was clearly getting embarrassed. Spells and stuff, you mean like witchcraft? Well, yeah, but then you went and ruined it all. The whining tone never really leaves them, does it, no matter the age? Sweetie, you can't just take my candles and light them on the floor. That's just a fire hazard. Look, just how close they are to the carpet. I thought you were more responsible than this. But Mom, please, it's just something we do to scare each other. I promise we'll be careful. I stood there for a moment, allowing all the information to be fully absorbed before making a final decision. After all, they were young teenagers, they would find a way in the end. I decided to try and scare them shitless. Make it so they would never, ever want to play with witchcraft, spells, or candles again. Okay, so you girls like to be scared, eh? Tell you what, you carry on with all your spells and stuff, but only if you're all brave enough to listen to the story of Mr. Never-Ever-Man. The girls looked at each other with confusing confirmation, nodding that they all wanted to do this, but their facial expressions said otherwise. After a few minutes of adjusting the necessities of the room, closing all the doors and drawers, and making it as scary as possible for them, I sat on the floor and joined their circle. Okay, girls, are you ready? They all nodded and muttered under their breaths to confirm they were ready. I left the tea lights burning, just relocated to a safer place, and these were our only source of light. One night, over 100 years ago, a man came home to find his wife in bed with another man. Fueled by pure and utter rage, the man tied them both to the bed, soaked their naked bodies in petrol, struck the match, and waited for them to burn. Once their bodies were up in flames and their screams had finally stopped, the man walked further into the room and stared into the mirror. The flames quickly engulfed the area, trapping all three inside, and as the flames spread and reached his own skin, he just stands there and watches. Watches as his skin changes color and begins to melt from his body. Watches as his hair catches fire and hot embers drip and fall upon his face. He watches through the mirror reflection as his wife and lover's bodies quickly burn, crisp, and decay. I can just about make out their faces in the flickering candlelight, a few of them frowning and cringing with disgust. Before the flames and the inevitable death could take them completely, the devil came before him and delivered the devastating news that he had also just killed his unborn son. The man made a deal with the devil, and a vow of vengeance upon all the children of the world. He proclaimed that upon his return, never ever would the world know of the young new life. How do you know all this, Mom? I just do now. Shh. A few of the girls snicker and giggle at my remark. I smile and continue with my story. With a loud and thunderous clap from the devil's thick hands, the man's soul was ripped from his melting body and instantly transported into the mirror. The man pounded from the other side, screaming and shouting at the devil, "You tricked me! You tricked me! I'm trapped!" To which the devil simply replied, "You are not trapped, my friend. You are now a demon in waiting. Once this incantation is read aloud, you will be free to wreak havoc as you please." In his hand, the devil held a single sheet of paper with a Never-Ever-Man summoning spell written on it. He tossed it to the floor with a smile and a flick of the wrist. "Let's see if the fire gets it." And poof, the devil was gone. One of the candles seemed to blow out on its own accord. I saw it from the corner of my eye, which made me gulp nervously. I continue. Legend has it that the fire was put out not long after, and the flames had only reached the incantation, burning the last few words away. Over a century later, and no one has been able to replace the correct words. "So what's the incantation?" asked one of the girls. I leaned forward slowly into the circle, creating more suspense. They all follow my lead, and I whisper to them in a scary voice. "Come, come. We call you now. Through this portal, we don't know how. Mr. Never-Ever-Man and your see-through skin." "See-through skin?" the same girl asked. Well, that's what me and my friends thought the words were. Did it work? No. Well, they're not the words then, they are. Cocky little shit. I held back my real words through gritted teeth and forced half a smile. Obviously. "What if it's break through your skin?" another girl interjects. "What if it's return to your skin?" my daughter added. The possibilities go on and on, girls. It could be many. It might not even be skin, shouts the cocky girl. True, but everyone has always used the word skin. Everyone? Yes, I smile at her through gritted teeth again. My eyes widen as I suck in the air through my nose. Her sassy little attitude was getting on my last nerve. Everyone. I stand up, blow out the candles, and flick the bedroom light back on. The cocky girl had just ruined the buzz, and now I just wanted to relax on the sofa with a nice glass of wine. Can we try and summon him here? I raise an eyebrow at the cocky little redhead with intriguing shock. Clearly the story didn't scare her enough. I lower my stance and lean my hands on my knees. As my head gets closer to hers, I look her square in the eyes. You do realize what happens if you actually summon him, don't you? Her face had already changed. She slowly and silently shook her head side to side. No? Well, there'd be no more of this, that's for sure. Playing with your friends in a nice, cozy house? His mere presence would terrify you, little girl. Once summoned, you see him glowing from the corner of the room. His two ghastly eyes stare back at you with an infernal madness. Hair of fire adorns his skinny head, which itself is completely devoid of any expression. Mom? The girl gulps hard. I just get closer to her face. He takes a few strides towards you, with a sickening contortion, and a whistling snort escapes his sinus nostrils set within his skinless, skeletal nose. Mom, come on, that's enough. He slowly creeps forward, that terrified look in your eyes bringing him joy. He sniffs your hair, soaking up your fear. He grabs your body with his bony fingers, and rips your soul clean away, and takes it down to hell. Here is where you will spend eternity. He scratches and claws anew, never ever, into your skin every single day. Never ever will you see your friends again. Never ever will you see your family again. Never ever will you eat food again. Never ever will you leave again. Mom, that's enough. Stop it. My daughter's voice brought me back to reality and motherhood. I shake off my stare with the girl, who now has tears running down her cheeks, and rapidly blink as I came back to the room. I turn to my daughter and smile. Sorry, sweetie. Got a bit carried away. Gee, you think? Please, just leave now, Mom. I did as I was told. I guess it was a bit too much at the end there. I wake suddenly to a harsh banging noise. It sounds like a window slamming back and forth in the wind. I roll off the sofa, kicking the empty wine bottle across the floor as I attempt to gracefully stand, and, epically, fail. The banging continues, adding my hangover even more. It's coming from my daughter's room. I squint down and frown at the clock as my brain registers 2 a.m. Her door squeaks like a perfect sound effect as I slowly push it open with one hand. Her net curtain was flying in the wind like it was possessed. The window was smashed hard into the frame over and over again, and most frighteningly of all 5 girls were gone. On the floor, though, in a perfect circle, were 5 burnt-out tea-light candles. In the center of them was a small piece of paper with messy, childlike scribblings on it. Come, come, we call you now. Through this portal we don't know how. Come, come, we invite you in. Mr. Never Ever Met. The rest had been burnt away. I apologize to you all. I really am so sorry. He's out there now, hunting down all the children of the world. I'm afraid I can only offer up my sorrow to you. Try and keep them safe, but most of all, love them while you can, because you might never, ever see them again.
A different kind of ghost story. If you have ever been to India or read a horror story by an Indian author, you would know that we Indians have a plethora of different varieties of ghouls. And you would also know that apparently all families have ghost stories, which are passed from one generation to another. In the following fashion, this given account had been told to me by my grandmother, who was told this by her grandmother. The year was 1929. It had been a stormy July night. My grandma was returning back home after shopping from the nearest shop, which was roughly 10 miles away. She lived in a village, and the streets through which she was walking were not lit. Therefore, it was complete darkness, save for the occasional lightning in the sky. It was going to rain heavily, as with any thunderstorm. She had walked for 6 miles, and seeing that she was just on the outskirts of her village, my grandmother felt relaxed enough to sit under a tree that was on the banks of the Narmada River. Now, since it was so dark, my grandmother could not see that the tree that she had taken refuge under was a peepul tree. Peepul trees, although considered sacred, were also considered to house the spirits of prets and churels, which are ghosts and female ghosts. This particular peepul tree was believed to be housing the spirit of Leela. Now, every single person in the village knew the story of Leela. Leela had been a low-caste girl, no more than 19 years of age around her death. She had fallen in love with the Englishman who had been assigned to her village. The village had called him Hearsay Sahib, and if gossip was true, then he had been a pretty handsome man. Well, the Englishman had taken a particular liking to Leela, a sweet young girl with long black hair and hazel eyes. The other girls in the village used to ignore her, and their indifference towards her only increased after Hearsay befriended her, for they too had fancied the young Englishman. But their boycott only led to the Englishman feeling more pity for Leela, and thus spending more time with her. The village headman did not approve of friendship between a woman and a man, especially an Englishman. He told Leela's father to warn her, but Leela neglected her father's words, and as surely as rain follows the summer, so did love follow friendship. Hearsay said that he had to go back to England and asked Leela to wait for him. Leela waited for 3 weeks, but then on the given day, she went to the place where Hearsay and she usually met, the peepul tree present at the outskirts of the town. She waited there in a red sari, the traditional dress of the bride. Morning was followed by evening, and evening was followed by night. Hearsay did not come. Leela sat by the river Narmada and wept. We found her hanging from the peepul tree the next day. In Hinduism, committing suicide is considered a sin, and supposedly, Leela's family was already of low caste, and the sins of the daughter would trouble the father, causing the whole family to be prejudiced and looked down upon by the village. Fearing this, Leela's family fled the village without giving Leela a proper funeral, The village had then decided to burn Leela's body under the peepal tree from where she hung herself. She was not to be burnt at the sacred place where the rest of the dead villagers had been burnt, for the fear that her lowly blood would pollute the land. 3 months later, a new collector was appointed who informed the village headman that Hearsay had died in a motor accident en route to England. Now Leela's ghost resides in that peepal tree, pouncing on whoever happened to be crossing it late at night, crying and screaming hysterically, asking for Hearsay. A few moments after my grandmother had sat down under the peepal tree, she heard the chun-chun of piles, which are Indian ankle bracelets. She saw a woman approach her, wearing a red bridal sari, with her gun gat drawn down. Although the woman's face was hidden, the sounds that she was producing seemed similar to sobbing. "Who are you?" asked my grandmother in a shaky voice. "I am Leela," said the woman in red sari. "I am awaiting Hearsay." Hearing the familiar name, my grandmother understood that the woman was none other than the soul of Leela. My grandmother had observed that in order to satisfy the spirits in the sacred peepal trees, the villagers would offer things to them, sometimes fruits or sweets or even other things. But Leela's peepal tree had never been offered any kind of offerings, as it was thought of impure rather than sacred. The only reason that the village folk had restrained themselves from cutting down the trees is that they did not wish to have Leela's spiteful spirit lurking inside the village. My grandmother seemed confident that the only reason that the spirit was uneasy was because it had not gotten any offerings. Thus, using her wits, my grandmother took a little container from the bag she had been carrying, offering it to Leela. She said, "This vermilion was given to me by Hearsay Sahib. He said that it is for you." Hearing this, Leela, or what had been her spirit, grew ecstatic and snatched the little container out of Grandma's hands. In Indian culture, vermilion is supposed to be the symbol of a married woman. Thus, on hearing that it had been given to her by the man who had promised to marry her, Leela's joy seemed to know no leaps and bounds. She looked down at my grandmother, and in that moment, her gun got feels down, revealing the most enchanting, beautiful eyes that ever existed. And in a frail, grateful voice, Leela said, "Thank you," only to disappear into thin air at the next moment. When my grandmother reached home, she was welcomed by her worried mother, who at first was loving and scared on hearing that my grandmother had encountered Leela's ghost, but had later smacked her with a beeline for giving away the expensive vermilion to a ghost of all things. I don't know if Grandma had been successful in providing eternal peace to Leela's soul, but there were no other reports of a red-clad woman pouncing on late-night travelers after that. Now, I don't really know if the story is true or not. If I were to ever present doubts regarding its authenticity to my grandmother, then the only thing that I would get is a box on the ear. Yesterday, I went to my daughter's science fair. Her class's theme was predators, and the kids had done a pretty decent job for middle schoolers. They even put up some kind of booth with a warning, "Come meet the world's biggest predator," and a mirror inside. That's cheesy, but it made me cry. Not because I'm a proud dad, I am, but because of something I know and makes me unable to sleep soundly anymore. Something scary. I'm an archaeologist, and a few years ago, I made a most terrifying discovery in a temple related to the Aztecs. It always bothered me that a bunch of white men that were decimating the sea for not eating oranges could put an end to the world's most advanced civilization so far. Don't you ever wonder how technological cultures just disappeared? Sure, they could have been overpowered by brute force, but the thing is, they were already succumbing, and my team and I have found out exactly why. The temple itself was astounding. The Aztecs had way more advanced technology than we do now. Longevity and pretty much every disease they knew cured. Check. Forms of communication similar to phones and internet. Check. Control centers for satellites to precisely forecast the weather. Check. Rockets way more sophisticated than NASA could currently dream of? Check. The template was not for a deity, it was for their ancestors. We would call it a museum. A desperate attempt to keep their knowledge because they started just forgetting how to do everything that mattered. They tried to write down what they knew, but after a while, no one else could understand written language, so they tried to pass it down to their daughters and sons, but most of them didn't have necessary knowledge. Put yourself in their place. If humanity forgot how to sow and reap, how to fabricate cars, or how the Wi-Fi works, would you have enough knowledge in your brain to teach a younger person how to do those things again? Soon, they were savages compared to what they used to be. Why? Because of the virus. Don't you feel yourself getting dumber and dumber? You were smarter. Let's say in 2009, the world seemed to be doing a better place than it is now, or seemed to be going to a better place than it is now. Everyone is worse. Nazism is back, eradicated diseases are back, people blame it on shorter attention spans and fake news brought by our phones. But deep down, don't you know that it seems like a huge stretch? We decided to keep our astonishing discoveries a secret to avoid causing panic. But I wonder if we did the right thing. We thought we were protecting you, sheltering the rest of the world from the ugly truth. Me and my crew, we were all infected. It quickly spread to the rest of the world. And there's no cure. If the Aztecs in all their glory couldn't avoid it, we can't avoid it. It's the very essence of the earth telling us to go away, because we take too much. Because we're both predators and vermin. Because our technology allowed us to live longer and spread more, making the nature suffer. The virus, unlike others, is not in a hurry. It goes for your genes. It wants your daughters and sons, the daughters and sons of your children. It will make us less and less intelligent. Our kids will born and grow up to be dumb and unable to bring progress. Their children will bring destruction because they will know nothing else. In our ignorance, plagues from the past will resurface. We will forget more and more, blaming it on Alzheimer's, argotoxics, and information being too accessible because of phones and computers. After they are gone, no one will know anything anymore. Painfully primal and vulnerable. I'm sure we're not the second or last civilization to be uprooted from the face of the earth. I'm sure others took too much before, got too smart for their own good before, and suffered the consequences. The others will again, such is our nature as humans. We want more, always more, and it's not necessarily greedy or in a bad way. But if it bothers our harborer, we have to go. The virus is not in a hurry because a dozen of human generations are but a heartbeat for Mother Nature. I quit my job as an archaeologist on field and became a professor. I had to travel too much, and I want to spend all my time with my wife and daughter. I just want you to live your ordinary life while you can. It will get more ordinary from now on. And no matter what you do, no matter if you recycle or go vegan or use bikes, you're still just a nuisance that needs to be ripped up off the earth. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this. The truth definitely won't set you free. But I decided to tell you what's going on to a selected few anyway. I'm sorry you were chosen to live with this terrible knowledge. Humans think of themselves too highly, but we're like fleas on a dog. And when we get too inconvenient, this good girl knows how to get rid of her parasites time and time again. I hope you enjoyed today's short story, and don't forget to submit your scary user-submitted stories to our email, whatlurksbeneath2018@outlook.com. You can find the email to submit your stories to in the description below. Subscribe now and get a new No Sleep story every single day, Monday through Friday, with fuller length videos coming every other day, if not sometimes every day of the week. Stay spooky, and remember to always fear what lurks beneath.